Welcome to the Connecting Dots podcast, where I talk to founders and other people who go their own way to distill their lessons and hear their stories. This episode is different. It's not the usual interview that I recorded with my own audio equipment. It is a recording of a conversation that I had on a new social audio app called Space. And my guest is none other than the founder and CEO of that app. His name is Zeeshan Sheikh. I hope I'm getting the pronunciation more or less right. I guess this is what happens when a German says an Arabic name in English. So, welcome to international podcasting. With Zeeshan, I talked about his founder journey from working as a software engineer to founding his first startup and now his second startup, the social audio platform Space. Space is an app for creators to distribute engaging audio content to their community. So whereas on Clubhouse you get a lot of low and some higher quality content, on Space you should get more higher quality content because the creators on there are more dedicated to the format. How did Zeeshan get the idea for Space? What iterations did the app go through? How can a podcaster like me and other creators use Space in the future? And a lot more I discussed with Zeeshan in this episode. Of course, I encourage you to check out the app Space and to follow Zeeshan on Twitter. As always, all the links are in the show notes, and now enjoy this conversation of Zeeshan and me spacing out. So, I saw that you are a software engineer. You studied software engineering, but for the first many years you were an employee, right?
That is correct. I used to be a developer. And then I transitioned to, what would you call? Management, pure management. And then from there, like I think about last year, I just said, all right, I'm going to go do a startup. But I've done startups before. This wasn't my first one. So,
yeah, I saw that you are the tech co-founder of a company called Blank Label, right? You're doing menswear.
Yes, we do menswear clothing. And that was co-founded in 2009, and it was, almost 11 years ago now? But that was 11 years ago, customs clothing, we were going to be online only doing shirts, and then we did suits in 2012, and it was growing pretty well. We had 5 or 6 stores throughout the US, and then with COVID, lots of bad stuff happened to many people. But the business is still there. And it's functioning at a much smaller scale, but it's mostly based in Boston, which is where it started from.
Yeah. You're living near Boston at the moment, right?
Yes, I live in pretty much close to Boston, the proper city. Yeah. I think people use Boston collectively for the whole Massachusetts state when they want to talk about Boston. I'm in Massachusetts.
Yeah. And did you, I saw that you started working on Space before the Clubhouse hype that happened now in January. So in January, it blew up in Germany and everybody's talking about it. But what is interesting is how many people are already feeling fatigued by it and feel annoyed by it. So they are looking for alternatives already.
Yeah, I mean, that's consumers are very finicky, right? Consumers like to go from one place to the other, which is why people like to spend money and build businesses that are SaaS enterprise, because those are harder customers to move from one to the other once you're actually stuck in a product. Like, imagine people are going to leave Salesforce, it's actually pretty hard.
Yeah, I see, yeah. And how did you get the idea for Space, or who got the idea?
Well, there's 2 ways to look at it. So like I said, in 2010, I left my architect job to go focus on leadership. And throughout that, I saw different problems that different engineering teams were facing. So I've run engineering, I've run professional services, I've run support, implementation, various different functions, but mostly like towards the technical nature versus something like sales or marketing. And one of the things that we would always see was like these silos within teams. So people would complain about engineering not listening to what the customer really wants, which is usually a complaint which would come from customer service, and then product management would complain about, sales wanting stuff that doesn't make any difference, and sales would complain about everybody else that no one wants to listen to us. So the idea was like, how can you open this up to other people so that everyone can see what you're working on and be a bit more transparent? Something like open door meetings. So in 2018, there was an idea to build something we called a Jump On. So this is one of my friends. And we built this product called Jump On. And the idea was what if we could take something that sales teams do, which is like get on customer service calls, and open that up to everybody else? Like, what if other salespeople could listen to those calls? What if developers could listen to those calls to see how the sales are going and what people want to buy? And then even customer service, have them be exposed to it. Eventually, we thought, maybe we could go from sales to like other departments like customer service and engineering. So that was 2018. We applied to Y Combinator, got to interview day, and then on interview day, we just didn't make it beyond that stage because their big thing was like, well, no one's going to leave GoToMeeting, because back then GoToMeeting was king. And they felt no one could come disrupt GoToMeeting's business. Of course, they hadn't run into Zoom yet. And the other thing that they were saying was that it's just too much work, that sales is such a tight cycle that they have integrations with like Gong and Salesforce and other tools that is going to be very hard for anyone to come in and kind of replace that business. They were right for some things. Like we did find that it was hard to actually go through that stuff. And then there was also something called wiretapping laws, which is you can't share audio without consent. It doesn't matter if it's recorded or not. So in the US, different states have different laws. Sometimes some states require like two-party consent, which is both the people have to be aware that something is being shared, and some people could be listening to the conversation. And that's what they didn't like. Because what we did is but in case you did a call with a customer, the customer didn't know that you maybe have like another 50 people listening to the call. And even though that happens like all over like the US, like you call any kind of like customer service center, they tell you your call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes. They're all recording your calls, but that's how they cover it legally. And I imagine you're like a company, you work at a company and you use someone else's product. If you call the sales rep, you don't expect to hear that message. So that was like really what stopped us from moving forward with that. So that idea kind of stopped in 2019. I learned a bit more from like why it wasn't viable. So we shut it down. We just thought it wasn't the right set. We didn't know how we would compete with GoToMeeting. And then, 2020 came along with COVID. And I was supposed to be in UK. Actually, we acquired a company in UK for the company I used to work at. We acquired a company in UK. I flew there for the acquisition, did the day one acquisition. We were then going to acquire a company in Switzerland, acquire a company in New Zealand. My previous company is growing actually pretty big in like EMA. So we were supposed to be, all over Europe, and I was supposed to run all our acquisitions and our tech teams. And because of COVID, I got stuck at home. So when I got stuck at home, I was using one of my friends' app called Friday app. It's like a workplace productivity app. Basically, it sends you a message, asks you to check in for your stand-ups. Different teams can use it. It's a pretty nice product. We were using it. And I just told him, like, hey, you have a great product. And he had just raised his funding. I told him, I'll give you this code that I built for like teams to be able to like work with others. I'm sure everybody else is like struggling sitting at home. Why don't you just take the code, give it to your developers, and build something with it? And he said, why don't you do something instead? Like, why don't you take what you have and build like a consumer app instead of like an enterprise app?
Yeah.
So around March of 2020, I took his idea and I started like playing with the code, seeing how it would look like. And I think by April, I was like, all right, we're going to build this. And I think a week afterwards, like Clubhouse showed up. This is last year, right? So that's when Clubhouse first showed up a year ago. Yeah. And we're like, okay, this is interesting. And I was just doing it for fun. I wasn't doing it to build a startup. I had a day job that paid great, decent work-life balance. And I was just having fun. I was like, all right, what can I do with this code that I built? And I'm stuck at home anyway, so I might as well figure out how to build community and connect with other people. And that's how I got into building space. And I think like we built a product, released it. Again, it's all on Twitter. There's nothing private that we did. We even like released early. We went to the App Store, I think, in August with all the bugs and everything. And I think even there's bugs even there right now, but we release every week. Like a little bit Android build later today to fix some other issues that we're having for some Samsung devices. Uh-huh. And we're building in public. And the idea is that it's still fun. I'm doing it full time now. We got funding from Jason. He was our first check. He was actually the first person who sent me a message saying, hey, you should do this full time. And
Jason Calacanis?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so he's our first investor. And he's the one who actually but put the idea in my head that I should maybe do this full time instead.
Yeah. Yeah, he's I'm a big fan of his podcast, also of his new podcast, All In, and he's bullish on audio, on yep. social audio. So I guess he he didn't invest in Clubhouse, so I think he maybe wanted to look for an alternative, right?
Yeah, that's how he found us. So again, that friend who I mentioned, Friday app, he's the one who actually shared space with him, told him about it because he was looking for investment in something that was competing or like Clubhouse.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. I saw him on here on Space, and I wanted to invite him to this conversation, but he obviously declined, which is fine.
Yeah.
And so, do you have anybody else in terms of investors or mentors on board? Jason?
Yeah, we have. I mean, we have a pre-seeder ongoing, and we've taken in a few other investors for that. Some angels, some accredited investors, so some VCs.
Okay, yeah, but I'm sure you cannot talk publicly about it yet, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. And do you see the growth in terms of users on Space that one would expect when there's such a run on audio and a lot of people feel fatigued or annoyed by Clubhouse already?
I think it's a different use case. I think with the social audio, it's a similar thing as consuming content because you're bored. And I think that's like the biggest difference is Clubhouse started off as a social hangout. And then when people used it, they said, all right, I can build a following, I can bring a community. And because everybody's already there, people are using it collectively. So I think it just depends how you see the Clubhouse world. I think if you look post-COVID, when people go back to their jobs between, 8 and 5 or 9 and 6, whatever they're doing, how will we react? Like, are we going to have time to sit on 10-hour Clubhouse sessions or not?
Mm.
I mean, here's what people are doing right now. And the same thing with Zoom, right? People are tired of Zoom. They don't want to be in video. They just want to be in meetings all day. And in the past, people were in meetings all day as well. I mean, I was in meetings all the time, but the difference was that you got to get up and go from one place to the other, and maybe there was a 5-minute break from one meeting, and you interact with other people. So there was a break, and then of course there was lunch and whatnot. Now with COVID and Zoom, it's just back-to-back meetings, and you're stuck in your chair, and it just sucks. So that's really what people I think are burnt out on, especially the peer pressure to turn video on. Maybe you haven't had time to get out, go shower, have breakfast, brush your teeth, and people maybe they had 2-hour commutes before. Now they just don't have them, so people weren't trained for how to function in Zoom. Otherwise, they'd be doing the same thing, right? Otherwise, you'd still be waking up at 6 a.m., go brush your teeth, have breakfast, pretend you're in the office, but you're doing a Zoom, and I just don't think people were trained that way. So with your question on Clubhouse and the burnout on that, I think it's a very different problem. I think what we're building for is the creator who wants to create content with an existing audience. They're not looking for discovery. They're not looking to go viral. They have a community. They have a brand. They care about the name. All right. They don't have time for all the issues that Clubhouse has with privacy and hate speech and other things that are happening there. So they want to protect their brand name. They want to protect their audience. They want to be able to export it to email if they want to. They want to be able to do something with it. With Clubhouse, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, it's the same problem, right? You can't do anything with those audience. They're on the platform and that's it. And even if you try to convert them, people will realize that you don't get to take 100% of them, right? Maybe you'll only get to take 20%, 30%. And people do this right now, right? People who are on Twitter and YouTube will take their fans to a Patreon or will take their fans to a Discord server just because they can connect with them off that platform.
So what for me specifically as podcaster, so I'm an audio content creator, and I indeed have the problem of having my audience on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on my homepage. I also have quite a bit visitors, and there's no one central way of communicating with them. I always have to publish on each platform, of course, and interact with them there. So there I'm of course looking for a platform where I have a centralized, a central opportunity of interacting with them, and also of making money in the end, of course.
Yep, and I think that's where something like Space can fit in very well because today you've seen the app. We're on it right now, which is you can go live and it'll record it. We don't have editing tools, so you'll want to most likely you'll ask me or you'll say, can you give me the MP3 so that I can edit the first 10 minutes of silence. So you'll most likely want to do that, right? So we'll add something like that later, but for now, where we are is we want to make sure that the sign-up process is frictionless, right? The person understands what they're doing, how it works, what they can get out of the product, have a very clear onboarding, and actually not even just have like an online onboarding at self-paced, but also like a hands-on onboarding. So if somebody wants, they can like book a session and somebody can walk them through, like somebody from Space will walk the person through like how they create content, how it works, how they can bring the community, guides, tips, things like that. On top of that, the flywheel will be very simple, right? You go live, maybe when you go live, people get notified. So if they follow your space, like, how you created a space, I followed it. When people follow your space, whenever you create a session, they get an email saying, Krishna's created a space for next week. Here's the details, click to RSVP. When you RSVP, you're opting into like drip campaign. So you get now updates like 7 days, 3 days, 30 minutes before. You also get push notifications on the app. If you're on the app, if you use Slack, you get notifications within Slack because we now have a Slack integration. And then from there, we'll probably add additional integrations, like most likely do SMS push notification as well. Now, when you do your session, let's say only like from your community you have 500 people and only like 20 people join. They consume the audio in real time. They can listen in real. They can interact with you. And once it's done, the recording is automatically posted to your community. Again, this isn't like, even though the quality is decent here, as long as you're using good setup and your speakers are using good setup, you'll have high quality on the recording. When you bring in audience members who use like Android devices and speaker on the Android device, and the quality can go down because that's where the quality will depend on how good that mic is. And from there, you can either decide if you want to do, release it as a pod, or if you want to do some post-production edits on it and then release it. But we'll allow for that. And then that content gets distributed to your entire members again. So they can always come into your page and see what past discussions were, and they can listen to the content. Over time, we'll even let people like send push notifications with SMS. Not SMS, with short audio. So it's not a live session. It's also not a recorded session. It's like WhatsApp, where you kind of do a 1 minute, 30-second kind of audio recording, and then it goes out to the entire members.
That's really cool. I like the idea of recording a raw conversation like we are doing now, and then later on the same platform you're recording it on, you have the option of editing it. So I of course do a lot of editing for my podcast. Do you already have there maybe it's a problem of finding enough options and resources for people to edit, but not make it a whole audio editing suite, We're most likely going to add editing tools later this year. I think before we go there, we need to make sure that there's something interesting enough for people to come use the product and maybe even pay for the product. We will not charge. So the part that I didn't cover is like the payment structure. So we want to allow people to connect Stripe or Coinbase or something else to their accounts so that they can get paid. So it's like an entry fee to either join the community, like a one-time fee, or it's like a subscription. So we want to be able to allow people to like set this up. So either the room is, maybe it's a live room, maybe the room is paid, maybe the recording is paid, but we want to somehow allow that. And then of course, even if you look at like Anchor and you look at these other platforms, if you aren't using, like if you look at Podia, you're paying to like store your audio, and then there's like caps on it. And even like with Gumroad, there's like caps on like how much you can store and what streaming quality it is. So we want to allow the same, but everything is high quality streaming. So our payments will be anywhere from, it'll be very much like Shopify. So Shopify charges you, I think like $35, $30. I don't know what it is, but Shopify charges like maybe $30 to like, I think the maximum plan is like $250 or $200, and then even goes beyond that. But with Shopify, they give you the technology, they give you the CRM, they give you all the tools, and they're just in the back end, right? They just give you all the tools, and they don't, like when you go to a Shopify site, it doesn't have to say Shopify, right? It's basically your brand. And that's really what we want to do is we'll charge people a flat fee. Maybe they'll be like Shopify, maybe there'll be a 0.5% or 1% processing transaction on the connector fee. But that's it. We're not going to do what Substack does, which is 10%. We're not going to do what Patreon does, which I think is 8%. Gumroad is also, I think, 10%. So we don't want to take a large cut. And then, of course, if you go to Twitch or YouTube, that's like 45%. So we don't want to take such a large fee. We want to be basically a pay for tech platform.
and not really care too much about, how much money we're taking from an individual creator. If an individual creator has like a 10,000 member community and each member is paying $10 a month, we don't really need to take the 10% from that, because that would be kind of highway robbery, which Substack does anyway.
Yeah. And you're betting on the creators bringing their own interesting, engaging content, right? Because a big problem in Clubhouse seems to be that it's a lot of chit chat and coffee house, Clubhouse, just regular talk, small talk, and but it wasn't that clear to me until our conversation now that it's more focused on creators and the own inherently interesting content that they bring,
Yeah, and I think we haven't done a good job of like updating our website copy. I think the version we have right now is like one improvement that we had from before. Before it was even worse. Before it was just like create content. That was it. It didn't even tell you what it did, and people just thought that we were just like Clubhouse. The current version kind of paints a different picture, and I think the new version we'll have in a few weeks is going to be a bit more obvious that it's really for creators to bring their audience and their content, and that they can monetize and whatnot.
Yeah. No, I like now that on the landing page I read the headline, the easiest way to create engaging audio content with your community. So that's cool. And it already frames a different picture than what you get there than on Clubhouse. And do you have an idea? What is obviously very difficult for all the social media platforms, whether YouTube, Facebook, whatever, is making sure that no bullshit or even just straightforward evil stuff gets published. So at the moment, I'm sure it's easier to monitor, but once the platform gets bigger, I'm sure it's very difficult to make sure that there's no racism and sexism and so on there. Do you have an idea of how you can make sure that once the platform grows, it also grows in a healthy way, so to say?
Yep, I think you already experienced some of the new kind of workflow. We don't let people just go live anymore. You have to create a space. You have to give a purpose for it. You have to explain what it's going to be used for.
Yeah.
So we force people to create within a space. We've also removed certain things which are like very social network focused, like followers count. You can't follow people on space. You can join a space, but you can't follow people. We also have, it's not very strict, but we do have a decent privacy guide that kind of covers how we manage a community and what rules are okay and what rules are not. And it's going to get tighter as we go along, because we want that to be obvious in like the onboarding flow, that when you're signing up, what is okay for space, what is not okay for space. So by creating friction, there's two things that we're doing. One is that we're kind of yes, we're hurting ourselves by slowing down growth, but also what this means is if somebody who has intent to actually create a community, they're actually going to go through with it, because it's more painful. There's more steps involved. Most people will say, right, how does this work? As long as it doesn't get a forward page or like get a crash on the app, they'll go and create the page, they'll submit the information to try to figure out what is this, how does this work? So on that side, because of the friction, because of stage gating, who creates the space and how this works, we'll be able to manually kind of look at what people are creating, either approve people or delete them. But then, of course, there's simple peer reporting tools like reporting somebody for violations, where we'll just review the information and ban the person and the space they created. Over time, even you can create a private space on space also, but because the spaces will be paid, we think it'll cut down a lot of the trolls and the hate speech, because that's what we see as most of the hate speech and the toxic stuff that exists, or the trolls that exist on the free platforms.
Yeah. And so when I, for example, announced this conversation that we have now, do you think there might be a way in the future of giving the creators more an opportunity to provide more text or even pictures, so to advertise the upcoming event in an even more interesting way, in a more convincing way?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I mean, we are not audio only, we're audio first. As you can see, the app already has text in it. We'll see how we add other stuff. It has to be somehow related to knowledge. It can't just be people throwing GIFs and memes in there. That doesn't really create a knowledge-based community or an information sharing community. So as long as the focus is how do I share this link with my community because we're talking about the subject, how do I share a screen, how do I, put some attachments that make sense for the community. I think we're not there yet. We'll probably get there later down the road. But I think if our thesis is, audio first community is what needed, focusing on that today doesn't really help pass or fail that thesis, right? So I think we have to first make sure we validate our thesis. And before we do that, we have more work to do.
Yeah. Maybe I feel like on Reddit, a lot of good comments, a lot of comments with that bring a substantial amount of information, of input to the conversation, get voted up very quickly and very efficiently. So do you think there's maybe a way of implementing some downvoting or down or upvoting system to make sure that the good content also gets seen more broadly on the platform?
Yep. I think once we get to the large volume, once we actually have that problem, I think it'll be easier to solve because then we can actually see it and we can see how do we solve it then. Right now we don't have that problem, right? The obvious problem was what we were seeing on the platform was the hate speech and racist stuff and sexism and things like that. So that was easy for us to solve even though we didn't have that problem. But for us to build out the moderation tools or the upvoting, downvoting when that volume isn't there would be building for something that maybe isn't needed today. It would take a bandwidth, but that's a very good idea that, yes, that's something we can look at implementing. And even for comments within for example, this chat, you have, if enough people report a comment, it can get removed from the window because right now you can see that the chat just sits there.
Yeah. And will there also be, I saw on capiche.fm, there's a way of integrating what you record on the Capiche platform to podcast platforms, podcast players. Will there also be a podcast player that's the wrong way to put it. Will there also be a way of distributing the Space app content to podcast players?
Yep, it's going to automatically distribute that to all the integration platforms. And I think there's also going to be built-in RSS on the page itself. You know how you have a page?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So there'll be a built-in RSS there. So you could take any kind of podcast reader and directly plug it there. So it doesn't have to go to Anchor or whatever. But we'll cross-post to all the platforms.
And do you see a way, because I already have an existing podcast with an existing RSS feed,
yep.
and it's going well and I'm happy about it, but I would like to have my Space content, so for example, this conversation, integrated into my already existing podcast feed, Do you think there will be a way of integrating my Space content into the existing podcast RSS feed?
I would think so. I mean, we do have an API that we're developing. Version 1 already exists. And I think really for an RSS feed, it would just be how do you take the RSS feed from here and include it in the other RSS feed, right?
Yeah.
What are you using to generate your RSS feed?
I'm on Simplecast, the podcast platform.
Okay.
And this would be a very cool way of doing, on the one hand, I would have my regular podcast conversations that I pre-record and edit well and that have really good audio quality. And then I also have more engaging live conversations that fans can chime in on. And then I could play this double role of live hosting, but also doing the pre-recorded ones. This would be really cool.
Yeah, I'm looking at Simplecast right now to see if they have something. Let's see. Do they let you include other content? I'll have to see what they have because either they need to give us an API that we can add stuff to their RSS feed or we can upload to their stuff.
Yeah, cool. And there will be for sure no plans to implement video. I mean, I guess it makes sense to distinguish the audio only or audio first platforms in a significant way from the already existing video platforms like Twitch and YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any thoughts on if there will be video ever, or maybe just in a small personal way, in addition to the voice intro that you have for a space, maybe also a video intro, which makes it a bit more personal?
For now, the answer would be that is purely audio. We'd have to look at what's there. I mean, there's so many different apps out there that can do audio, video, audio only, video only. Cameo is like an example. There's like so much other stuff that's out there that you can engage with simple like video broadcast that if we start doing that now, we're trying to like do everything. And that really dilutes what we're actually trying to do.
Do you have anything more that you like want the community that also might listen to this later on want to let know about the progress of Space in the next weeks and months? What new features or changes will come to the platform?
I think the biggest features that we're going to have is going to be around the friction of onboarding yourself, being able to go live and host people and content. And yeah, it'd be great if people want to try it out. We have a clear page where they can, I think on our homepage, there's like a way to like request access, but even our homepage is going to change. And then also I think monetization is something we're going to release in the next couple of weeks. So for people to be able to connect Stripe to their account and start charging for sessions or charging to join the community is something we want to try to push out in March itself. So that's going to be the biggest feature for us. That's going to be differentiating on something else because other people also charge, but they do take a higher cut. So we just want to kind of close that use case because that's the last thing that's left out there for like what a creator might want.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. That's very exciting. Zeeshan, thank you very much for your time and for the conversation.
No worries.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. For more inspiring lessons and stories from founders and other people who go their own way, please subscribe to the Connecting Dots podcast on whatever podcast player you prefer. It would also help a lot to get further interesting guests in the future if you give the podcast a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you very much, and until next time.